But one of the things about secret stock files, right, it's that this is all great military technology, but can you commercialize it? Because that's where you really become something. Like you can be a niche military supplier, and you can eke out a good living for yourself like that. But one of the like questions about Palantir specifically was always like, okay, you guys have all these government contracts, but can you get into the commercial space? And now you're seeing AI get there too.
All right, here we are again, the Angel Research Podcast with another Jason. We only talk to Jasons on this podcast. It's just Jason after Jason after Jason. But this Jason is Jason Simpkins, editor of Secret Stock Files. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I always love being here.
Yeah, I like listening to your your thoughts. I like listening to everybody. I don't want anybody to feel slighted, but I particularly enjoy.
Well, the comment on one of our videos said that Stutman was their favorite Jason.
I saw that,
and that was hurtful. Whoever that was, like
no. And then we fired Jason Stutman. No, I'm just kidding. So let's jump it. I don't know exactly where we start. We were talking, but today is June 1st. Okay. So supposedly there's a debt ceiling deal. Mm-hmm. They made a deal. I don't know. It hasn't gone through. Have you followed that at all?
From a distance, because I think like a lot of people, I've kind of really lost patience with this kind of. It's a lot of political theater. It's a lot of, and it's like in the best case scenario, you're threatening to default on our debt and just basically crash the economy out of spite, or, in the other scenario, you're just doing this to grandstand and extract, whatever little bit of, policy gains you can get out of it. I did see it. It didn't look like much. It was like cut back on SNAP, on food stamps, and, cap spending at 2022 levels for a year. It doesn't really move the needle.
Yeah, it was just another kick the can down the road scenario till likely after the next election. And so I guess, hey, if it goes through. The one thing, though, that they did not cut, which obviously we want to talk about, is military spending.
Yeah, you noticed that, did you?
Yeah.
That's a big thing. There's no debt ceiling for the defense budget. I think it's probably not going to grow as fast, because whenever you get into these kind of hard spending negotiations and it becomes public discourse and you make what the United States government is spending the central issue, then defense spending is going to naturally become a target because it is at a record high. It is the Biden budget proposal was for something like $858 billion, and it's probably going to be more than that. Typically, Congress will actually add money to the president's Pentagon outlay, so it was definitely going to get up near $900 billion. And the past few times I've been on here, I've been saying, we're going to hit $1 trillion defense budget, and we are. With this, it may just take a year or two longer than I initially expected. I expected that whoever wins the next election, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump or some other contender that comes out of here, is that first year they're going to be the one to unload that $1 trillion defense budget, because they're going to come out, they're going to be, if it's Republicans are always really big on defense, Democrats a lot of them are quieter about it, but they will obviously give just a tacit approval for it. And this is something I've talked about before, but the key thing you have to remember is that the defense industry is obviously enormous, and it's all over the country. So like Boeing's in Seattle, Washington, right? So blue states have these giant, facilities, whether it is Lockheed Martin here in Maryland, blue state. We have a lot of defense contractors here.
Northrop Grumman,
for example. So you have all these jobs that are tied into the defense industry, and there's an entire supply chain that, basically fills out this entire thing. It's almost like the auto supply chain, goes down to part suppliers all the way up to retailers and car dealerships. well, the military is kind of the same way. You've got these big, sprawling apparatuses that have a lot of people. They have their own bureaucracy. They have their own specialization, certain niches. You know, you need people with clearance and stuff like that. You know, there are scientists. There are all these things. There are sales reps that go out and convince the government that you should buy these products from Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or whatever. They also obviously have a very powerful lobbying. So you know, there's not a lot of bipartisanship that you're going to find in Washington. Defense spending is one of the areas where both parties generally agree. Save a few people especially on the left side in particular, that are going to come out and say, well, the defense budget's too high. That's where you get to like the Bernie Sanders AOC, that kind of flank of the party. They're never going to be happy with defense spending as high as it is, but literally everyone else is more than happy to have defense spending at an extremely high level.
Yeah, they don't want to be seen as soft on defending their country.
Sure.
It just gives too much ammo
it's
to...
incredibly easy for a politician because one, like, if you go, I'm going to cut defense spending, well, don't you care about the troops? Do you not want the war fighters to have the most advanced, most lethal, most, you know, protective gear that they can have?
Yeah, they're writing images of soldiers going into battlefield wearing like plastic bags as armor.
I mean, you know, and the other thing, it's an easy sale geopolitically because, like, Russia's invading Ukraine, so China is constantly looming over Taiwan. We all know that there's this countdown to China invading Taiwan. We know they're going to do it. And so it's really hard to look at that world and go, well, let's cut defense spending. No. I mean, it was an easier sell 20 years ago when we're invading Iraq or whatever, and we've got our own unpopular war going on. But when you've got countries out there like Ukraine fighting for their lives, fighting for their existence, when you've got these autocracies in Russia and China, you know, coming out and, you know, just in a blatant effort, just explicitly saying they're going to rewrite the world order. And they've made it their main mission to topple U.S. hegemony and turn over the global order in a way that is more favorable to them so that they can do what they want. Well, I don't know how you cut defense spending in that environment. I just don't know how you do it.
Yeah, and there's so much that goes into what you might consider defense right now. All of the you have the whole like cyber war side of things, not just the traditional, you know, guns, bullets, tanks, planes, and stuff, but all of that infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, there are thousands of cyber attacks the world over every day, you know, and adversaries like China are constantly trying to hack into government computers. They're constantly trying to hack into defense contractors. I mean, and you could see the kind of ingenuity of it when they're flying, you know, Buick-sized air balloons over our country. Like, that's how far they're willing to go. Like, that's how blatant they'll be about it.
You don't really hear too much about the balloon stuff anymore. People just kind of lost interest, I guess.
Yeah, well, you know, it was sort of like the balloon boy. You know, it comes up, and it's like a big thing when it happens, and then, you know, we're on to the next thing. Now we got to talk about the debt ceiling for 3 months or whatever. Like, we can't talk about China floating giant balloons over.
Yeah, they're like, no, don't worry about that.
You know, it happened. It captivated us all for 2 days. SNL did a skit about it, and then we are on to the next thing because, you know, that's just, you know, the media. That's just American attention span, you know. It's people forgot the balloon thing until I just brought it up just now. They're like, oh, yeah, the balloon thing.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking of the balloon. So speaking of attention, I guess it wasn't last week, the week prior, there was a 60 Minutes piece on military, I guess you would call it price gouging.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of plays into what you're talking about is it was kind of funny to like see members of the government just sort of like complaining about
Absolutely. I laughed.
these companies. And it's like you put yourself into this position.
Yes.
And it's like, I don't see how that's anything new.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, there's a few things. Like I said, I laughed out loud at that. Because, one, we were just talking about the debt ceiling, and I don't think it's a coincidence that someone basically from the Biden administration leaked this thing about military like price gouging and defense contractors and defense budget right at the time where we're talking about spending cuts. Like, okay, yeah, sure, this is just a coincidence. This is coming up now. But it made me laugh also just because, like, would you say that in your personal life over the past few months or years you went into a store and didn't feel like you were being price gouged. I mean, like, you go out to dinner and you look at the menu prices, or you go to the grocery store, you look at your energy bill. I feel like I'm getting price gouged every day. And for the government, that didn't really seem like a problem for them, because, and this goes back to 2020, and I was furious about this for at least 2 years. That's how long I was on this tangent, because when the pandemic first hit, all the government wanted to talk about was how, like, oh man, prices are so low. We're hitting a period. We're actually worried about deflation, And I was like, are you serious? Because I'd go to the grocery store and my bill was like 2 or 3 times higher than it normally was. I'm like, these prices are going up, not down. And for that whole year, for all of 2020, it was just like, no, inflation is flat at best. It's maybe up 0.1%, like, if anything. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's higher than that. I wrote whole articles in the Outsider Club about it's actually higher than what the government's reporting. The next year comes around and they're like, oh yeah, prices do seem to be going up, don't they? But don't worry, it's transitory. And then they spent an entire year telling us, oh no, 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 it's just a blip. Like, it's just that prices were so low during the pandemic. They weren't. But they were so low during the pandemic that now the comparables, the year-over-year comparables, look high. But it's really not that bad, and it's going to be gone before you know it. You're all just alarmists.
Well, they were blaming the lack of supply. Oh, it's because
supply
the lack
chain
of supply.
issues.
Yeah.
We'll get that sorted out now that we're post-pandemic. All of this stuff. And that ended up being bullshit too, right? So the next thing they went to after that, they started blaming us. They go, yeah, okay, inflation's gotten out of control, but the problem is wages are too high. You guys, you're making too much money. That's the issue. The Americans are out here, unemployment's too low. What we're going to have to do is have the Fed raise rates so to not put some of you out on the street and suppress wages, because that's the problem with inflation. And then this happens. We've got a guy in the government come out and go, man, can you believe the price gouging? Can you believe that Raytheon is overcharging us on parts and labor? Like, it happened to us? Like, I can't imagine. I can't imagine why. And what you said about them doing it to themselves is entirely accurate. Because for decades, the government supported efforts in the in the defense, among defense contractors, to consolidate. They pushed industry consolidation. And this has been a challenge for me as a defense stock analyst for a long time. It's taken me a long time to be able to dig in and find companies that supply the bigger companies, because our defense sector is dominated by 5, maybe 6 defense contractors. You're looking at Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and General Dynamics. Those are the big 5. And so they get probably 80% of the defense work together. And it's really difficult to dig in and find smaller or even mid-sized companies that get gobbled up. And that's not just a coincidence. That was part of a government effort, because they felt like, oh, if there's industry consolidation, then these suppliers will streamline their businesses. They'll, be more vertically integrated. They will ease kind of the supply chain. Will make things more streamlined.
And hopefully get cheaper prices.
Yes, exactly. And it didn't occur to them that might backfire. That, like, oh, maybe they'll just consolidate and have more leverage. And so now we find ourselves in a situation. And by the way, the entire time that was going on, these industry-friendly policies, like I said, they were a product of the lobbying by the defense sector. So members of Congress took the checks from these defense contractors, as they're wont to do. And then they're going to turn around and complain about the leverage that defense contractors have, which they gave them. And another thing that happened, because this came up in the whole 60 Minutes piece about this, it was that the government also laid off thousands of government workers whose job it is to negotiate prices with defense contractors.
I was going to say, isn't there there's not a contract in there? It's just like, hey, we need that. I mean, one of the things they mentioned was like, oh, we need this part or whatever, and this is the only company that provides it. Or
So, like, speaking of bureaucracy, there is an entire, and I know this, I'm really, really familiar with this job because my wife does it. She is a contracting officer for the U.S. Army. She works at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. And so her whole job, and the job of all of her friends and people like her, is they negotiate with defense contractors on these deals. So there are teams of people out there doing this. And that's even how they know that they were being price gouged, is because they investigated it. They're like, well, why are we paying this much for this? And they kind of do this stuff, and like that's a thing, and they just laid them all off.
Yeah. So how? I mean, if there really is only one supplier, like how can you even negotiate?
Right, and a lot of it's murky. I mean, if they're going to tell you a missile costs this, how are you going to be in position to say, well, no, it doesn't?
Yeah.
You know, it takes a lot, and it becomes, you get into that issue, you would only know if there's a competitor that goes, we could sell you a missile that does the same thing for less. But if there's only, you know, 5 and they're all basically in cahoots with each other and they all hang out and they all go, well, we're charging the government this, they go, great idea. Like, we'll start charging the government that too, you know? And this is why, like, with Raytheon in particular, it's like, yeah, so you're overcharging. Maybe that's why their revenue was up 10% last quarter. You know, maybe that's why their earnings are up. Maybe that's why they've paid dividends every year going back to 1936, okay? So the money's there. And, you know, the government is, they're going to pay it because, again, they're always going to want the latest and greatest stuff. They're always going to want the technology. They're always going to want to look strong. They're always going to want to, like I said, reinforce those job chains that exist. In, you know, again, not just in terms of propping up commercial work, putting planes together, putting aircraft carriers together, putting this stuff together, all that manpower, all those jobs, but then the entire government bureaucracy that then goes and orders those things and does the analysis of those things and all these jobs in the Pentagon, these government workers. Because you start cutting the defense budget, well, guess what? You start cutting them too. I mean, the defense budget doesn't all go to missiles. It goes to employees. It goes to people. And they want to protect their constituencies. And so that's what they're going to do ultimately. And that's why all of this stuff about price gouging, it's like, yeah, one, have you been in America recently? And like, what makes you think you're special? And 2, you're not going to do anything about it. You're not going to do anything about it. You're going to maybe, at best, instead of raising the defense budget 3% next year, we're going to raise it 1%. So it's still going to increase, but not as much as it would have. And then it's going to go right back up to the $1 trillion I was talking about, probably by the fiscal year 2025.
Is there a particular sector within the defense sector or budget now that you see as like the biggest growth opportunity?
Yeah. So those stocks that I've been making the most hay with recently are all AI and like drones, and they're very connected. And so I've been talking about them a lot. And so I can tell you, like, in a lot of people with AI, one of the big stocks people talk about is C3 AI. And I invested in that stock. I got people into that stock last August for like less than $15 a share. It was still kind of, AI hadn't hit as a trend yet, and what they were doing is preventative maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
So they would, like, especially with the Air Force, they could predict when a certain subsystem would fail and have those parts ready to either replace them before they fail or know what's coming up, and they could have better fleet readiness. And so that's how I found them. They also do a lot of other similar kind of stuff just with AI. They have big partners like Google and I think Amazon. So they have major partnerships with this stuff. But that stock's also been hugely volatile for just that reason. I sold it first a couple months ago for like 130% gain. And then I sat here on this podcast with Luke Burgess, and I said, if it falls back down to 20, I'm buying back in. And it did. It went back down to $17.50. We bought back in. Earlier this week, it was up over $40 per share. So we were on, like, we were sitting on like 160% gain. It's down today and this week, the latter half of this week, because it reported earnings and it didn't, like, blow anyone's mind. Earnings went up, revenue went up, earnings per share went up. But people's expectations now for this technology are so high that the market got ahead of itself, so it sank back down.
Well, we had NVIDIA come out and say, oh, like, you know, just become $1 trillion company, and they're like, raise their sales projections like up 60%. So that was a few days prior. So I think people
That's
are like,
exactly
oh,
what happened.
Here's another AI play.
Yes.
I want this to do the same thing.
And that's the thing. Yeah, people are getting really gully with it. And so, like I said, we're still up on that stock. Obviously, I think it's like just now in like the 30s. So I'm still sitting on like a double, and over the course of a month. But I always tell people, I'm like, buy it under 25. Don't get it now. Don't get it over 30. I don't know if it's going to drop down to 17.50 again, which is why I didn't sell it for the game, because I looked at it and I'm looking at it's over $40 per share. I'm like, I don't know if this stock's going to see $17 again in the short term. So might as well just hold it now and see if we can do better, because I already cashed in 130% on it once. Like you could just keep going back to the bank on that. But I'd rather see what the company does from here and where the growth is. But because that's like I said, what they're doing for the Air Force, they can apply that to other branches of the military. You can do the same thing with tanks. You can apply AI to kind of so many things in terms of optimizing your manpower and like where to deploy troops and how to deploy them, and kind of like how are you being effective with what equipment, what kind of results are you getting. And so a company similar to that is Palantir. That's a company I've been talking about for a long time. It's up 90%, or maybe even fully doubled in the past month, because they just turned in their second quarter of profitability, which was a huge step for them. In the first quarter of this year was the first year they reported a net profit. A lot of people were like, because you do get these companies, they sound good, the products sound fun, the technology, it's all promises, but they never turn profitable.
Right.
Palantir turned profitable this year, and then it stacked a second quarter on top of that, and then they gave their outlook for this year, which was better than they expected. They too pivoted even harder into AI. And so Palantir has always been interesting to me. That's one I found because, they would do a lot of stuff for the government. They work with the Department of Homeland Security to track illegal immigrants. They work with Customs Border Patrol. They work with the FBI. They allegedly helped find Osama bin Laden before it went public. It was founded by Peter Thiel. But they've been huge. They've been having a ton of success in Ukraine. This is what really got that company kind of back in the conversation, is because the work they're doing in Ukraine with AI, and basically they're collecting all this satellite data and synthesizing it together to give Ukrainian soldiers real time, imaging of Russian positions and letting them target right there on a tablet, and even deploy munitions right there basically on a tablet. They're basically dialing up drone strikes on on an iPad.
And who's paying for that?
Well, we are.
Exactly.
And that spending's outside of the defense budget.
That's a separate thing.
That's a whole separate thing. All those billions of dollars we've been sending to Ukraine, I've lost track of how much. I had a counter on how much we were sending. I think I stopped counting after we got over $30 billion in aid over there. But that was very successful. And but one of the things about secret stock files, right, it's that this is all great military technology, but can you commercialize it? Because that's where you really become something. You can be a niche military supplier, and you can eke out a good living for yourself like that. But one of the questions about Palantir specifically was always okay, you guys have all these government contracts, but can you get into the commercial space? And now you're seeing AI get there too. And so with Palantir in particular, they just signed a deal with a fashion company, a fashion retailer called C&A Modus. They're based in Brazil, and they're basically using the same technology that is being used, in war fighting in Ukraine. They're using it to track their inventory and find out what's selling the most, what's not selling, and then proactively get inventory into the stores, because they know what's actually working and what's not, and they're using that to adjust their business models. And you're going to see more of that in the real world in terms of using the technology to draw actionable insights from information. And that's always been Palantir's bag. It's always been everybody's got information. The government agencies collect volumes and volumes and volumes of information. Even advertisers, retailers, they all have this information. They're all, tracking your phone stuff. They all have cookies on their web browser. They have all this information. What are you going to do with it, though? This, but what's there? How are you going to respond to it? How are you going to use it to increase your profitability? And now with these AI models, you're able to do that. You're able to punch that data in and go, what can you tell me about this? What does the data really say here? And then you can actually increase your profitability or kill a Russian tank battalion. Like you can do either. So that's been the major growth sector that I've been focusing. I would say that and drones certainly in general. Um, that if
Yeah, it seems like every day we're hearing stuff about drone activity or getting videos of drones
yeah
doing shit over in Ukraine
yeah.
and Russia.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. They're cheap and they're expendable. Okay, so it's like you have multi-billion-dollar weapons platforms, whether it's an F-35 or an M1 Abrams, and billions of dollars get put into these things. You have a drone; it costs $5 million. You send it over; it gets the job done, and you don't. There's no pilot. You don't have to worry about sending a flag home to a mom. Like you can just get this stuff out here. You can crank it out really cheaply. One of the guys in Ukraine said, if we had more drones, we could win this war tomorrow. Like that's just it. It's just a matter of at this point getting supplies. It's just we can't build them fast enough. But yeah, it was also earlier this week. And for a while now, they've been talking about this counteroffensive that Ukraine's going to launch because there was this lull in fighting over the winter, and then there was a Russian offensive that really didn't accomplish much, and then it was like this long-planned Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is going to make use of all these tanks that we've been sending them. It was a big deal. They got the Leopard tanks from Europe. They got some M1 Abrams. They've been training on these platforms. Now they got to go use them and take their country back. And I think we're getting close to that point with the counteroffensive because there have been all these drone attacks on Russian soil. They literally sent 8 drones to Moscow on Monday, and they got past Russia's border defenses, so they got to basically like kind of like the ritzy suburbs of Moscow, where a lot of even like politicians live, and they shot down like 5 of them, and then used basically electronic warfare to disable and disorient the other 3. Well, they still crashed into stuff. They still crashed into apartment buildings. They still landed on the street. They launched 2 drone attacks against Russian oil refineries. They're starting to go after their energy, which is, if you really want to hit Russia, hit them in their oil production. That's all they have. That's their only lifeline so far throughout this whole thing has been sending oil to China and the Middle East and whoever will have it to skirt the sanctions. And then also not to say they can't even fuel their vehicles, right? So you have these kind of attacks now that are these drone attacks deep in Russian territory. And again, that's all drone stuff. You don't need to send a MiG or an F-16. You don't need to do all this stuff. You can send the drones.
Does it look like there's an end in sight for that conflict?
Maybe. Depending on how the counteroffensive from Ukraine plays out, it's just so difficult because, if Putin loses, he's done. I don't really know how he can stay in power with a mistake this big. I don't know how you can admit defeat if you're Russia. And they are losing, and they have been losing, and they're not going to get anywhere near what they were hoping for out of this entire thing. And so now, like, their only move is to try to wait us out. What they want to do is wait until, because there are some people, we're talking about the leftists in the government that are against defense spending, but there are people on the right too that have been, for whatever reason, I'm not going to speculate as to why, but for some reason against Ukraine and pro-Russia. Those people exist. And I think, they really want to wait to see, like, the dream for Vladimir Putin would be to get Trump back in office. Like that would go a long way for him in terms of getting the West to back off its arms supplies.
Yeah, because it's not even. I mean, it's basically we're in a war with Russia.
Oh yeah, 100%.
We just
It's
aren't
a proxy
using.
war.
Yeah, we just aren't using. Well, it sounds like that leaked document said there are some special forces.
There
in
are
there.
special forces. There always have been.
But
yeah.
they're direct. So the technology and the equipment and the money to pay for it is all coming from the U.S.
Yes.
And we're telling them, like, hey, so it's basically we're just like, we're not pressing the button, but we're like, hey,
we're doing everything
press that button.
Yeah, we're loading the gun, cocking it, and handing it to them and going,
and telling them who to point it at.
Yeah, exactly. We've been giving them, obviously, information, satellite information, all kinds of information about, Russian troop positions. Elon Musk's Starlink has been providing them with internet connectivity. We've been training them, Ukrainian soldiers. They had Ukrainian soldiers in like Omaha, Nebraska, training on American weaponry. We have them in Poland. We have them. We're bringing these guys out of the country to train them, and then sending them back in, teaching them how to, once they know how to use weapons. And by all reports, they're very fast learners. So they're going out there, and it is 100% a proxy war. It's one I personally believe is worth fighting. I think it's been a tremendous success from that perspective to see Russia undercut the way it's been and not have to expend a single American life about it. If it's just money and guns, we got plenty of those. This is America, man.
Well, yeah, guns, yes, but money, the money seems to be where that if the faucet of money stops, which people aren't happy about spending all this money because it's got to come from somewhere,
right.
And I don't know. I wonder. I don't know the math on it, but if they would have, not funded I don't know, maybe it only would have gave us an extra week in the debt ceiling debate. But it's like at some point the money is going to dry up, or it's other Americans are going to notice that hey, wait a minute. You want to tax me more so that we can fight this war over there?
I don't know that the expenditure on Ukraine in particular is ever going to be that great. I mean, if you look at the actual budget outlays, we're spending magnitudes more on, Medicare and Social Security,
right,
and all that stuff. Even though I know $30 billion is a big number, but at the same time, in the context of our budget, it's not.
30 million or 30 billion?
Yeah. Like in the context of the U.S. budget, when you're talking about a trillion, we have $1 trillion in debt or whatever, more than that even, and it's like, I don't know, it just doesn't really. Again, it's kind of a drop in the bucket, and it's kind of like if we do talk about government waste. Where can't you find it? It's the same thing. It's, it's the same thing as the price gouging. It's like if you want to make a thing of it in this particular instance, sure you can. It's there. But it's everywhere else too. Like there's plenty of government, bloat.
Oh yeah.
So, but that would be the only way. And even then, though, to get back just to the question of how it ends. At that point, even I think it would still just be a bloody stalemate, and that's because Russia at this point has kind of expended all of its resources. It's running low on troops. It already conscripted 300,000 troops, and it's already burning through those guys. And then their tanks, they've been using Soviet era tanks. They have Soviet planes. It's just all of it's already just they don't have enough to get anything other than what they currently have. Any notion that even if we stopped funding them tomorrow, Russia would not have enough juice to get to Kiev. They don't. And so it would just kind of be a stalemate. But that's also been a kind of thing with the United States too. It's that we've done enough to help Ukraine survive and repel Russia. We haven't done enough to have Ukraine win. There's still stuff we've been holding back on. Longer range missiles or more advanced weapons platforms, F-16s, that we've held back out of fear of antagonizing Russia. If those fears kind of dissipate, because with every new arms shipment, Russia pushes back its own red line. That they've been threatening to use nukes, right, this whole time. Well, if you do that, we're gonna go nuke. We're gonna go nuclear, but they haven't done it, and it doesn't seem like the more every day that seems less and less like a plausible threat from them.
Well, because it seems like every other week you hear about it.
Russian losses and new stuff, and they say don't send the tanks, and we send the tanks, and nothing happens. So, that could push it. Dissent in Russia, Putin literally being toppled, that could happen. And because now we're talking about these drone attacks on Moscow, this is already an unpopular war. Not a lot of Russians are going to tell you that because they'll be thrown in jail, but it's not a popular war. Everybody kind of, even Russia's fiercest propagandists struggle to justify this war. And so, for regular people whose sons are going over there and dying constantly into this meat grinder that is the Ukrainian front line right now, there's already a great amount of dissatisfaction with that. I mean, there have been people fleeing the country, obviously, for, to just get out or to avoid being conscripted themselves. And now the more vulnerable Moscow looks with things like drone attacks, that's going to brings the war right to your doorstep, and that's something that was kind of like when the U.S. did invade Iraq. If you could imagine, if Iraq started sending drones back and attacking the suburbs in New York City or something, it would be like, whoa, like maybe we shouldn't. What's going on here? All of a sudden that it becomes a reality for you. It's not like we're just sitting on the TV watching our planes bomb.
Well, he can't argue that we're winning or
Yeah.
that we're crushing those
No.
in there. Like, wait a minute, it seems like they're getting closer to
Yeah,
us.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so it's unpopular, and now it could get very unpopular, and it depends on how long. Like Vladimir Putin is basically kept in power by this group of oligarchs, and he's been able to get very far and have a really tight grip on that country because he's been able to make them money. He's been able to keep them wealthy and expand their wealth. And, it's a kleptocracy is all it is. And if those guys turn on him, or if they start telling him things he just doesn't want to hear and gets rid of them, and it gets to a point where he is just kind of, this lone madman, or it would depend on if, say, he decides out of desperation, I am going to do it, I am going to nuke Ukraine. Are there going to be people that go, no? Are there going to be people in the Kremlin that we're not going to go that far?
Well, and they want Ukraine. They don't want to nuke it.
Exactly.
Into a wasteland.
Yeah, like I said, it would be like if the United States dropped a nuke on Mexico. Like your neighbors, right? It's going to blow back. It's going to, depending on which way the wind's going, this could be bad for you too. And what good is it going to do for you to basically take the territory that now is just a radioactive gravesite? What is the...
That would have to be basically he's a lunatic.
Exactly.
He's like, I'm taking you all down with
exactly.
me.
It's just kind of like the only way he could see to bringing an end to the war and saving face, any kind of face, would be to do something so horrendous that, it leverages that ceasefire deal into place, and they can try to lock what little territory they have left of Ukraine down, maybe keep Crimea or whatever, and just try to freeze it, because at this point, like I said, they don't have enough power to do anything more than cling desperately to what they have and are fast losing. So I think any kind of dissent in the Kremlin, if people looked at that, and also if they did go nuclear, the repercussions, I think, from the West would just be severe. I mean, and I think even then there have been points where you can even have seen a little bit of fracturing, a little bit of space in the kind of Russia-China relationship. China goes along with this because it's good for them to have a hostile Russia, buffering them in Europe and the West, and to keep them occupied. And if we have to worry about the Black Sea, that's fewer resources we have to send to the Pacific. But even they are kind of like, this didn't go the way you planned. This has really backfired. This is getting ugly. And at some point it becomes too costly to even be associated with Russia. And I think if they went, and launched a tactical nuclear weapon, I think even their friends, even China, would probably step back and go, that we didn't sign up for all that. And then Russia would really be alone. Because like I said, their only lifeline throughout the economic sanctions has been these other kind of, pariah states that are willing to navigate around them and negotiate around them. And so if they even lost that, then I think they'd be out of everything. You lose everything at that point.
Yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen. So, all right, well, I think it's time to wrap up here. You want to tell people how they can join Secret Stockpiles? We'll put a link in the description.
Put a link in. Make it easy on them.
Yeah, we'll put it right in the description. And we would be curious to hear your comments, even if it's about which Jason you like better.
Even if they're hurtful.
Yeah, even if they're hurtful, bring it on. We love to hear your comments.
I don't mind.
And yeah, like and subscribe, and we will see you soon. Thanks.